Have you ever looked back at a difficult time in your life and asked yourself, how could I have let this happen? That single question can completely destroy your ability to trust yourself. So, if your self-trust has bottomed out, where do you even begin to rebuild? This week, we're talking exactly about that. Now, to give context, I'm going to go to the beginning. And for me, the journey of rebuilding my self-trust started the moment that I completely lost it. And that was when it was actually maybe like in the days and weeks, maybe months after I had just gotten out. And because I was in a safe place, safe enough to sort of like feel how I feel and revisit things how I remembered. I just remember accepting and coming to terms with the amount of violence that I had been living with and had survived. When I truly came to terms with that, I was floored. Like I couldn't believe how much violence I had experienced. And when I really accepted that I was in an abusive relationship with many forms of violence, I completely lost any trust in myself. Because once I came to terms with and accepted what I experienced, the next thing that almost immediately happened was I asked myself, how could I let this happen? Um, which was a devastating question, but an honest one. And I was completely at a loss. And, eventually I, from that place, I, in order to rebuild self-trust, the first thing you have to do before doing the rebuilding is sort of start with the facts, right? I had to think about what actually happened, not her narrative or the narrative that allowed the two-person cult to exist and to thrive, but like the actual facts of like what happened. And something you might wonder, like, how do I do that if I don't even believe myself? And something that really helped me at this stage in my journey was what something I call like matching resources. There were podcasts, books, support groups, anything that helped me identify patterns. I remember listening to an episode of a podcast called A Dance with Darkness, and it was an episode about emotional abuse, and I was floored. I could not believe that every single thing that the person on the podcast was talking about, like I resonated and I related to it, and it was only after hearing that outside of myself that I could finally look at the evidence and be like, wow, if I experience all of these individual things, then that means altogether this was abuse. Um, and it's really important to start with the facts because, as I mentioned in earlier videos, like, being in an abusive relationship is like a two-person cult, which means the reality is the reality that the abuser or the harm doer wants to reinforce that allows them to get what they want, right? So just sort of finding a way to cut through that and start with the facts is really, really important. Then the next part, and this actually it was really hard, um, was to feel the feels. And not just feel the feels, but actively work towards not suppressing those really uncomfortable feelings, like not suppressing the shame. Like I had a lot of shame for the violence that I experienced, and I felt embarrassed about it. And I had to let myself feel that shame and feel that embarrassment. And underneath part, in addition to experiencing all of that, honestly, one of the reasons why I felt shame and embarrassed because underneath those feelings, I still had like a sense of longing, like and sadness, and like I still loved her. Even after I get out, even after I knew it couldn't happen, like I loved her. And I was ashamed and embarrassed that I could love someone who could do something like that to me, which brings me to the next the most important piece, that if you don't allow yourself to do this, I just it's like a barrier, like a brick wall. And that's what it was for me. This next piece was to mourn the loss. Even though I felt ashamed for loving and missing this person, I did. And I found that I needed to mourn the loss of the person, of the relate, or not just the person. I mourn the loss of who I thought she was. I needed to mourn the loss of the relationship and what I thought it was and what I thought it could be. I needed to mourn the loss of the dream and the fantasy of like what could have been. Knowing that, as I came to terms with what I was experiencing, I eventually realized like what I had been hoping could be true was never ever possible, but I still needed to mourn that because that was a hope for me for so long. And not only that, I had to do all of that while getting really curious about other versions of myself without judging her. These are crucial to rebuilding self-trust. There is no way, for me, I found there is no way around it. And that's kind of why, rebuilding self-trust is a journey, not a destination, I'm sorry to say. And this Friday, I'll be sharing a practical guide on how to navigate it, especially when your gut feels broken. Okay. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And before you go, I'd love to know, what's one area of self-trust you're focusing on right now? Let me know in the comments. See you later.